Daniel had spent most of his life in quiet solitude. His small farm in Montana was surrounded by rolling hills and endless fields of grass. It was the kind of place where the wind could whistle for hours without interruption, where the sun rose slowly over the mountains and painted the sky with soft oranges and pinks. Daniel liked the peace of it, but sometimes the silence was too much. He had grown used to the empty house, the creak of floorboards beneath his feet and the lonely sound of his own voice echoing in the kitchen. Still, there was a part of him that longed for someone to share the space with. He did not know that this longing would soon bring someone into his life, someone who carried the weight of the world quietly on her shoulders. Daniel had considered many ways to fill the emptiness he felt. He had thought about adopting a dog, a cat, or even a small farmhand to help him with the daily chores. Yet none of those ideas felt right. He wanted someone who could sit quietly in the evenings and watch the sunset, someone who could share the simple moments of life with him, a conversation over coffee, the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees, the soft warmth of a fire on a cold night. After much thought, he decided to take a step that frightened him more than anything else. He signed up for an international program that connected men seeking companionship with women from faraway countries looking for a fresh start. It was something he had only dared to think about in dreams, a connection that seemed impossible but now appeared within reach. The day he was to meet her, Daniel woke up early. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming grass. He wore a clean shirt and jeans, the ones he felt comfortable in but that showed he had made an effort. He arrived at the small, quiet airport a little early, parking his old truck near the arrival gate. The airport was modest, with a few travelers hurrying about and an occasional flight announcement echoing through the hall. Daniel clutched a cardboard sign with the name Lena written neatly on it. He had spent the past week going over her letters and photos, but the thought of actually seeing her in person made his chest tighten. He hoped he would recognize her among the crowd, that she would recognize him too, and that the long journey she had taken would not have frightened her. Then, slowly, she appeared. She stepped through the automatic doors carrying a single worn bag. Her movements were careful, almost delicate, as if she were afraid of making a mistake in the wide-open world she had entered. Lena was dressed simply in a soft sweater and jeans that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair was dark and slightly tangled, falling across her shoulders. She had a shy smile, small and hesitant, and her eyes seemed to carry a story that words could not fully express. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. It was not the excitement of a new beginning he felt, but a deep, quiet empathy for the woman standing in front of him. He sensed that she had endured much in her life, and he wondered how he could ever be the person to help her feel safe again. As she approached, Daniel extended his hand, but she hesitated. Her smile flickered nervously, and she looked around the room as if searching for an invisible escape route. Daniel understood immediately that she was cautious, not because she did not trust him, but because she had been forced to learn caution from an early age. He lowered his hand slightly and smiled gently, giving her space. "Lena," he said softly, "it's nice to finally meet you." She nodded, her eyes flicking up to meet his for a brief moment before dropping again. She mumbled a quiet greeting, her voice soft and musical in the quiet of the terminal. The drive back to the farm was long, almost 3 hours through winding roads and rolling hills. The silence inside the truck was comfortable at first, but Daniel could sense her tension. She kept glancing out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every so often she would glance at him, then quickly look away. Her eyes were full of thought, carrying memories that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Daniel resisted the urge to ask too many questions, knowing that forcing conversation too soon could frighten her further. Instead, he tried to talk about simple things: the changing colors of the leaves, the smell of the rain on the fields, the quiet songs of birds returning to their nests. Lena responded with small nods or brief words, careful not to reveal too much, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders relaxed. When they reached the farm, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and rose. Daniel pulled the truck into the driveway, and Lena stepped out, taking in the wide open space. The farm was larger than she had imagined, with a white wooden fence stretching along the fields, a red barn that creaked in the wind, and a small vegetable garden by the kitchen window. She took a deep breath, the air carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. For the first time in the day, she let herself pause and truly see her surroundings. Daniel watched her quietly, noticing the subtle way she allowed herself to relax just a little. He showed her to the small guest room he had prepared, a simple space with a neatly made bed, clean linens, and a window that looked out over the fields. Lena placed her bag on the floor and walked slowly around the room, touching the edges of the furniture as if checking that it was real. Daniel did not interrupt her. Instead, he gave her a few moments alone, understanding that she needed to adjust to this new reality. She finally turned to him, a small smile forming on her lips, though her eyes still held the weight of unspoken experiences. Dinner that night was quiet but warm. Lena served a simple meal and Daniel complimented her cooking, trying to make her feel at ease. They ate slowly, and though conversation was limited, the shared silence was comforting. Daniel could sense that Lena was testing the waters, measuring the safety of this new life she had stepped into. He did not push her. He only smiled softly, made light comments about the farm, and sometimes simply nodded, letting the quiet do the talking. For the first time, he realized that the small things, the preparation of a meal, the pouring of tea, the gentle closing of a door, could mean more than words. After dinner, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the crisp night air. The sky was clear, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly close in the quiet countryside. Daniel pointed out constellations, telling simple stories about each one, and Lena listened, her hand brushing against the blanket in thought. She did not speak much, but Daniel could tell that she was beginning to trust the presence of someone who did not ask for explanations, someone who simply allowed her to exist without judgment. When it was time for bed, Daniel helped her settle in, noticing the careful way she made the bed, tucking the covers just so. He left the door slightly open, knowing that small freedoms mattered when someone was learning to feel safe again. Lena lay down, staring at the ceiling for a long time before finally closing her eyes. Daniel watched her for a few moments from the doorway, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He did not know her full story yet, but he knew that her trust would not come easily. And yet, as he turned off the light and closed the door quietly, he felt a small spark of hope. Hope that this quiet, reserved woman could find a place of peace in his home, and that he could find companionship in return. The first night passed without words, but with small, meaningful moments of connection. Daniel lay awake for a while, listening to the gentle rustle of the wind, the distant call of an owl, and the soft rhythmic sound of Lena's breathing. He knew that this was only the beginning. A new life had arrived on his farm, fragile and tentative, carrying scars that were not yet visible but were present in the careful way she moved, the quiet way she spoke, and the heavy pause that lingered in her gaze. Daniel did not fear it. He only knew that he would need patience, understanding, and kindness if he wanted to help her heal. And in that quiet Montana night, a subtle bond began to form between the lonely man and the woman who had come across the world in search of a second chance. Days passed quietly on the farm, each morning and evening marked by the simple rhythms of rural life. Daniel woke early to feed the animals, and Lena would quietly follow him into the kitchen, helping prepare breakfast. She moved carefully, her gestures precise, as if she were still learning to trust the routine of a world that felt safer than the one she had left behind. Sometimes she would hum softly, a tune that seemed familiar to her but foreign to Daniel. He would pause mid-task just to listen, feeling a gentle warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. It was a sound that made the house feel alive. Lena still spoke little. She answered Daniel's questions politely but briefly, often nodding or shaking her head. Her English had been improving since the first day, but there were long pauses, moments when her mind seemed elsewhere, almost lost in distant memories. Daniel noticed how she flinched at sudden noises, a branch scraping against the roof, the distant bark of a dog, or even the sudden slam of a door. He did not comment on it, though, simply giving her space and the comfort of knowing that she would not be judged for her reactions. He had learned early in life that patience was stronger than words when it came to trust. One afternoon, Daniel asked her to help him in the garden. The sun was warm on their backs as they dug small holes and planted seeds for the coming summer. Lena worked quietly, kneeling in the dirt, her hands careful as she pressed the soil over the tiny seedlings. As she reached for a small trowel, her sleeve slipped slightly, and Daniel noticed a faint, pale mark along her wrist. He paused, staring without saying a word. The line was almost hidden beneath her sleeve, a remnant of some forgotten hurt. Lena caught his gaze for a brief second and quickly pulled her sleeve back down. "It's nothing," she said softly, a little too quickly. Daniel nodded, choosing not to press. He could sense that she had stories she was not yet ready to tell, and he respected that. Evenings on the farm became a quiet ritual. They would sit on the porch drinking tea, listening to the wind move through the fields and sometimes just watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was filled with the sound of crickets and the occasional distant call of a fox. Daniel began to notice small details about Lena, how she avoided mirrors, how she often wore long sleeves even when the sun was warm, and the careful way she moved around the house. He felt a mix of curiosity and concern, wondering what experiences had shaped her into someone so careful, so guarded. He tried to make her feel comfortable in small ways. He would leave a favorite book on the table for her to read, put fresh flowers in a vase near the window, or start the kettle for tea before she asked. Lena began to respond with small smiles, moments of laughter, and soft words of thanks. Though her trust was slow in building, Daniel could feel the change in the air. The house seemed lighter, the silence no longer heavy with tension, but filled with a quiet, tentative warmth. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Daniel invited Lena to help him with the animals. The chickens needed feeding, the horses brushing, and the barn needed tidying. She followed him out, her movements cautious but willing. Daniel handed her a brush for the horses, and she began slowly, carefully smoothing the coarse hair of a brown mare. As she worked, she spoke softly, telling Daniel about her love for animals and how she had always wished to live in a place like this, where the world felt alive and open. Her words were few, but they carried a sincerity that touched him deeply. As the day went on, Daniel noticed Lena becoming more comfortable with routine. She laughed when a chicken pecked at her fingers, and Daniel found himself smiling at her small reactions. Yet, there were moments when she would pause suddenly, her hand tightening over the brush or a small shiver running through her shoulders. It was in these moments that Daniel first began to sense the weight of her past, a past she had carried silently, carefully hidden beneath layers of courage and restraint. The following night, a heavy rainstorm moved over the valley. Rain pattered against the roof and the wind howled through the trees. The lights flickered and then went out, leaving the house in shadows. Daniel lit a few candles and moved around to check the windows, while Lena stayed near the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She trembled slightly as thunder rolled across the hills, and Daniel noticed the subtle tension in her body. He did not rush to speak, only moved to sit beside her, offering his presence as a quiet shield against the storm. Lightning flashed outside, and for a brief moment, the shadows in the room illuminated the faint lines on Lena's wrists and the small marks along her arms. Daniel caught a glimpse and paused. There were scars, faded but visible remnants of pain that she had tried to hide. He did not say anything, only reached out a hand slowly, resting it gently on hers. "Lena," he whispered, "what happened to you?" Her body froze, eyes wide, and for a moment there was only silence. The storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the quiet candlelight. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she turned her arm over, revealing the full line of scars that ran along her forearm. Daniel did not recoil. He only held her hand more firmly, his gaze steady and full of calm. She pulled her sleeve back down, her voice barely audible as she said, "I didn't want you to see." Daniel shook his head softly. "You don't have to hide from me," he said. "You're safe here." It took a long time that night for Lena to speak. She told him about her past in small, careful pieces, the hardships she had endured, the challenges of leaving everything familiar behind, and the hope that had driven her to seek a new life in a place far away. She spoke of her family, the ones she had left behind, and the dreams she had held as a child that had never come to fruition. Daniel listened without interruption, letting her words flow and filling the space with understanding and quiet compassion. The days after the storm were brighter, both outside and inside the house. Lena began to move with less hesitation, her steps lighter, her laughter more frequent. She helped Daniel with chores without hesitation, offered small insights into life in her homeland, and even began to share some stories of her childhood. Though the scars on her arms remained, they no longer felt like secrets between them. They were part of the quiet truth that Daniel respected and accepted without judgment. Evenings were spent on the porch, as before, but now Lena would sometimes speak, telling Daniel about the sky, the stars, and the small wonders she had noticed in her new life. Daniel would listen, sometimes interjecting with his own stories of childhood memories on the farm or the simple joys of life in the valley. The house, once filled with silence, now had a rhythm of trust and tentative connection. One afternoon, as they sat near the garden, Daniel handed Lena a notebook and a set of colored pencils. "For your thoughts," he said simply. Lena looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She opened the notebook slowly, running her fingers over the blank pages. That evening she began to draw, small sketches of the barn, the fields, and even the mountains in the distance. It was the first time in a long while that she allowed herself to create something freely. Without fear or hesitation, Daniel watched quietly, proud of the small steps she was taking toward healing. As the days passed, Lena's confidence grew slowly but surely. She began to anticipate chores, smile more readily, and speak in sentences that were longer and more fluid. She still flinched at sudden noises and sometimes stared into the distance as if recalling past memories, but she no longer seemed afraid to exist in the world around her. Daniel found himself smiling at her small victories, feeling a deep sense of connection that grew stronger with each shared moment. By the end of the second week, the quiet tension that had hung over the house began to lift. Lena moved with ease, laughed softly at Daniel's clumsy jokes, and even began to plan small meals on her own. The scars on her arms remained, but they no longer felt like barriers. They were marks of a past she had endured, and Daniel accepted them as part of who she was. In her presence, he felt the first true sense of companionship he had experienced in years. That night, as the stars sparkled above the farm, Daniel sat beside Lena on the porch, watching the gentle sway of the trees in the wind. She leaned slightly toward him, a small smile on her lips. No words were necessary. The silence was enough to convey the trust and quiet connection that had begun to bloom between them. Daniel realized that while the journey of healing was far from over, they had both taken the first important steps that promised hope, understanding, and a new beginning in the heart of the Montana Valley. The storm that had been predicted for days finally arrived in full force. Thick, dark clouds rolled over the mountains, casting long shadows across the farm. Rain began to fall in steady sheets, drumming against the roof and windows, while the wind whipped the trees and bent the tall grass in the fields. Daniel moved quickly, checking the barn and the animals, making sure everything was secure. He could hear Lena moving quietly inside the house, the soft sound of her footsteps muted by the carpet. She was tense, more so than usual, and Daniel could sense that the storm was bringing back memories she had tried to forget. By evening, the storm had grown louder. The electricity flickered and then failed entirely, leaving the house in darkness. Daniel lit several candles, their warm glow casting shadows that danced on the walls. He called out softly to Lena, who appeared from the kitchen wrapped in a thick blanket. She moved cautiously, holding the fabric around her shoulders as though it could protect her from the harshness of the world outside. Daniel gestured for her to sit beside him near the fireplace. The heat from the flames offered some comfort, but the tension in the room was almost palpable. As the thunder rolled through the valley, Lena shivered slightly, hugging herself. Daniel watched her carefully, noticing the subtle tightening of her hands, the slight quiver of her shoulders. He wanted to reach out and offer reassurance, but he knew that rushing her would only frighten her more. Instead, he moved closer slowly, letting his presence speak instead of words. She glanced at him briefly, her eyes wide and cautious, before returning her gaze to the fire. The storm outside was loud, but the quiet inside the room was even more powerful, filled with unspoken thoughts and memories that weighed heavily on Lena's mind. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the room for a brief instant. In that moment, Daniel caught a glimpse of her sleeve slipping slightly as she adjusted the blanket around her. A faint pale line appeared along her wrist, almost hidden but unmistakable to him. Daniel froze, his heart tightening with concern. He had seen small hints before, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the careful way she moved. But this was different. He could see the evidence of past pain, scars she had worked hard to conceal. Gently, he reached out, placing his hand over hers. "Lena," he whispered, his voice soft and steady. "What happened to you?" Her body stiffened and she looked at him with wide, startled eyes. For a long moment, there was only silence. The storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the intensity of the moment between them. Slowly, almost hesitantly, She pulled her sleeve slightly higher, revealing more of the faint lines and marks along her arm. Daniel did not move back. He did not look away or flinch. He simply held her hand and looked at her with calm, unwavering attention. "I didn't want you to see," Lena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her fingers twitched nervously beneath his grasp. Daniel shook his head gently. "You don't need to hide from me. You're safe here." His words were quiet but carried a depth of meaning that Lena felt in her chest. For the first time, someone was acknowledging her pain without judgment, without fear, without rejection. She felt the warmth of his presence, the safety of his calm voice, and a tiny spark of trust began to grow inside her. Slowly, Lena began to speak. At first, it was just small fragments of her past, broken sentences that spoke more through emotion than words. She told Daniel about the place she had come from, a town filled with narrow streets and crowded markets where life had always been hard and the future uncertain. She spoke of the difficult days of work and struggle, the quiet moments of fear that had haunted her in her youth. Daniel listened without interruption, holding her hand and letting her words flow like a river that had long been dammed. As the storm raged outside, Lena's voice grew steadier. She told him about the times she had felt alone, about the nights she had stayed awake worrying about her family, and about the decisions she had made to leave everything familiar behind. Each word was heavy with meaning, a piece of her past that she had carried silently, carefully hidden beneath her cautious exterior. Daniel felt his heart ache with empathy. He had known loneliness and hardship in his own life, but he had never experienced the depth of fear and endurance that Lena had survived. The night passed slowly, filled with small pauses, quiet breaths, and occasional tears. Daniel did not speak much. He only held her hand, letting her know that she was not alone, that she did not need to carry her burdens in silence any longer. The storm outside continued, but inside the house, there was a new presence, a shared connection, fragile yet strong, that began to form between them. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and the soft light of a pale sun breaking through the clouds. Lena sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket, her gaze distant but calm. Daniel brought her a cup of tea, setting it gently beside her, and she nodded in thanks. The night's confessions had left her exhausted but lighter, as if a small weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had shared pieces of her story, and in doing so had begun to trust Daniel with the parts of herself that had been hidden for so long. The days that followed were marked by small, meaningful changes. Lena moved more freely around the house, no longer constantly adjusting her sleeves or avoiding certain gestures. She began to help Daniel more confidently with daily chores, smiling when the horses nuzzled her hand, or laughing quietly when a chicken startled her. Daniel noticed these changes and felt a quiet joy, knowing that the walls she had built around herself were slowly beginning to crumble. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Daniel asked her gently about her dreams. Lena hesitated at first, but then she spoke of her love for art, for colors and shapes, for capturing the beauty she sometimes saw in small moments. She had not painted in years, but the spark of creativity still burned quietly inside her. Daniel listened, encouraging her softly, and suggested that she might start a small notebook or sketchpad to record her thoughts. Lena looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, feeling that for the first time, someone truly believed in her potential. Beyond her past or the scars she carried, evenings continued to be moments of quiet reflection and shared connection. They would sit by the fire or on the porch, watching the sky darken and the stars appear one by one. Daniel began to see Lena's subtle joys, the way she tilted her head to watch the sunset, the soft smile that appeared when she spoke of her favorite childhood memories, and the gentle laughter that occasionally slipped past her lips. He realized that trust was being built, slowly but surely, through patience, respect, and the quiet understanding that she did not have to hide anymore. Over time, Lena began to reveal more of her past, sharing small stories with a mixture of emotion and humor. She spoke of her childhood home, the narrow streets and markets, and the little moments of joy that had stayed with her despite the difficulties she had faced. Daniel listened with patience, never interrupting, allowing her voice to fill the space that had once been dominated by silence. He understood that this sharing was not just about recounting events. It was about reclaiming her story, about turning the quiet pain of the past into a shared understanding that could no longer haunt her in isolation. The connection between them deepened gradually. Daniel found himself anticipating her small gestures, smiling at her tentative jokes, and feeling a quiet pride when she took steps toward freedom from her fears. Lena, in turn, began to look forward to the routines of the farm, the gentle rhythm of the day, and the comfort of having someone beside her who did not judge, who did not demand, but who simply understood. The scars she bore, both visible and invisible, no longer defined her in isolation. They were part of her history, acknowledged and respected by someone who saw her for all that she was, not just the pain she had endured. By the end of the third week, a subtle transformation had taken place. Lena moved through the house with more ease, laughed more freely, and even began to plan small activities on her own, such as tending to the garden or sketching in her new notebook. Daniel noticed the shift with quiet satisfaction, understanding that trust and healing were gradual processes, but that each step mattered immensely. The storm that had revealed her scars had become a turning point, a night that marked the beginning of deeper connection, trust, and the tentative start of healing. Daniel and Lena were no longer strangers sharing a house. They were companions navigating the fragile space between past pain and future hope. The journey was far from over, but they were taking it together, step by step, day by day, with patience, understanding, and a shared commitment to rebuilding a life that could be filled with warmth, laughter, and quiet joy. The days after the storm brought a gentle calm over the farm. The rain had stopped, leaving a soft mist in the valleys and the rich scent of wet earth in the air. The fields gleamed with droplets of water on each blade of grass, and the mountains beyond shimmered under the slow morning sun. Daniel and Lena moved through the farm in quiet harmony, their routines now interwoven with small gestures of understanding and shared care. Each morning, Daniel would wake early to feed the animals, and Lena would join him without hesitation, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables or a warm cloth for the horses. There was a lightness in her steps that had not been there before, a subtle reminder that the storm had washed away some of the fear she had carried for so long. Lena's confidence was growing, but slowly, carefully. She still hesitated at sudden noises, still flinched occasionally at the harshness of the wind or the sudden clatter of the barn door. But Daniel had learned to recognize these moments and meet them with gentle calm. He never scolded her, never urged her to act differently. Instead, he would speak softly, guiding her through the task or simply offering a steady presence beside her. Over time, Lena began to respond with small smiles and relaxed shoulders. Her laughter became more frequent, sometimes slipping out at the smallest, simplest things, a chicken chasing a leaf, a horse nuzzling her shoulder, or Daniel's clumsy attempt to lift a heavy bale of hay. One afternoon, Daniel asked Lena to help him repair a section of the fence that had been damaged during the storm. They worked side by side, the sun warm on their backs and the scent of the damp earth mixing with the faint perfume of the wildflowers growing along the edge of the field. Lena held the hammer carefully, placing nails in precise spots while Daniel guided the wooden boards into place. She paused once, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, and for the first time, Daniel noticed the way her eyes caught the sunlight. A quiet sparkle that had nothing to do with the storm or the past, but with a sense of purpose and pride in the work she was doing. As the afternoon continued, they took breaks to drink water and watch the clouds drift across the mountains. Daniel asked about her favorite things, and Lena began to share small details about her life before she had come to Montana. She spoke of quiet memories of her childhood, the way sunlight filtered through her bedroom window in the mornings, the sound of birds singing outside, the smell of bread baking in the ovens of the town she had left behind. Her voice was soft but steady, and Daniel listened closely, feeling the depth of her story without judgment. Each word she spoke seemed to lighten the burden she had carried silently for so long. In the evenings, they spent more time together by the fire or on the porch, watching the world outside transition from the golden glow of sunset to the soft darkness of night. Lena began to talk more, sharing her hopes and dreams in small, careful pieces. She told Daniel about the small joys she had once found in painting, about the colors she had loved and the sketches she had made as a child. Daniel encouraged her gently, suggesting she take up a notebook or small sketch pad to capture her thoughts. Lena accepted the idea with a quiet nod, feeling that for the first time someone truly cared about her passions, not just her past or the scars she carried. The first sketches appeared a few days later. Lena showed Daniel a simple drawing of the barn, the mountains, and the fields around the farm. She had used soft, flowing lines and delicate shading, capturing the beauty of her surroundings in a way that was deeply personal. Daniel smiled, seeing the pride and care she had poured into her work. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "You have a talent for seeing the world in a way I could never imagine." Lena blushed slightly, looking down at her drawing, but the smile on her face lingered. She had allowed herself to create something freely without fear for the first time in years. As the weeks passed, Lena's comfort on the farm grew. She began to help Daniel with more complex chores, taking initiative and suggesting ways to improve the barn or organize the garden. Her laughter became more spontaneous, her movements more relaxed. Daniel noticed the small ways she expressed herself, the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the careful way she handled the animals, the gentle way she spoke to him in quiet moments. He realized that trust was not something that could be forced. It was something that grew slowly, through patience, understanding, and the simple act of showing someone that they were safe. One morning, Daniel brought Lena a small wooden easel and a set of paints he had purchased at the town market. He placed them on a table near the window in the kitchen, where sunlight streamed in and illuminated the colors. Lena looked at the easel with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, touching the surface lightly as if checking that it was real. "It's for you," Daniel said softly. "A place where you can paint and see the world the way you want to." Lena's eyes glistened with quiet gratitude. She set up her paints and brushes carefully, and for hours she worked in silence, capturing the light in the valley, the texture of the barn's wood, and the distant mountains that had become a symbol of the new life she was beginning. The evenings were quieter now, filled with soft conversation and small shared moments. Daniel would ask about her day, and Lena would recount her experiences with thoughtful detail. They shared meals together, sometimes laughing over simple mistakes in the kitchen, sometimes sitting in companionable silence as the fire crackled. Each moment strengthened the bond between them, creating a sense of familiarity and safety that had been absent in Lena's life for so long. One day, Daniel noticed that Lena had placed a small wooden box on the windowsill. He asked her what it was, and she smiled faintly. "It's for the things I want to remember," she said. Inside were small sketches, pressed flowers, and notes about the world around the farm. Each item carried a memory, a thought, or a hope for the future. Daniel felt honored that she shared this private collection with him, understanding that it was a sign of her growing trust and comfort in his presence. The farm itself seemed to respond to the change. The animals moved with ease, the garden flourished, and the house felt warm and alive. Even the small quiet moments on watching the sunrise, hearing the wind rustle through the trees, feeling the warmth of the fire, were now shared experiences, each one reinforcing the bond that had begun to grow between Daniel and Lena. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel and Lena sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets. The air was crisp but gentle, carrying the scent of the garden and the distant mountains. Lena leaned slightly toward Daniel, her head resting on his shoulder, a small, quiet smile on her lips. For the first time, she felt safe enough to rest without worry, to be present in the moment without fear. Daniel felt a deep sense of connection, realizing that the patience, care, and understanding he had shown were beginning to bear fruit. The night passed with quiet conversation, shared stories and laughter that was free of fear. Lena spoke of the things she wanted to do, the dreams she had long kept hidden, and the joy she felt in finally being able to express herself without worry. Daniel listened, offering encouragement and gentle guidance, understanding that her journey toward healing was ongoing, but that each small step was significant. Over time, Lena began to share more of her creative work with Daniel. She painted landscapes, animals, and sometimes abstract shapes that reflected her emotions and thoughts. Daniel admired her dedication, and she grew more confident in her abilities. The act of creating allowed her to process her past and embrace the present, transforming fear into hope and isolation into companionship. By the end of the 4th week, the transformation in Lena was undeniable. She moved through the house with ease, smiled frequently, and spoke openly about her thoughts and feelings. The trust between her and Daniel had deepened, forming a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The farm, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of shared life. Lena realized that the scars she carried, both visible and invisible, no longer defined her entirely. Daniel had accepted them without judgment, offering his steady presence and unwavering support. In return, she began to see herself not as someone broken, but as someone capable of growth, creativity, and connection. Each day brought new opportunities to learn, share, and embrace the life that had once seemed out of reach. The days continued with shared meals, painting sessions, and quiet walks through the fields. They laughed, they talked, and sometimes they sat in silence, content with each other's presence. Each moment, no matter how small, became a thread in the growing tapestry of trust and companionship. Daniel knew that the journey was not yet complete, but he felt a profound sense of gratitude that Lena had chosen to share her life with him, that she had allowed herself to be seen and understood. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned soft shades of twilight, Lena and Daniel stood together on the porch watching the world grow quiet. She rested her hand on his arm, a gesture that spoke more than words could. In that moment, they both understood that healing was not a single event, but a series of small, meaningful steps taken together, with patience, understanding, and care. Spring had fully arrived in the valley, bringing life back to the farm in ways that felt almost magical. The trees were bright with fresh leaves, flowers bloomed along the fences, and the fields glistened with morning dew. Daniel and Lena had settled into a rhythm that felt natural and comforting, a daily life that was filled with shared tasks, quiet conversations, and small moments of laughter. Each day seemed brighter than the last, as though the valley itself was responding to the changes that had taken place between them. The farm no longer felt like a place of silence and routine. It had become alive with the warmth of trust and companionship. Lena's confidence had grown steadily. She moved through the house and the fields with a quiet assurance that had not been there when she first arrived. The small gestures of nervousness, flinches at sudden sounds, hesitant movements, averted eyes, had become rare, replaced by laughter, gentle smiles, and open gestures. Her painting had become a daily ritual, with the small easel near the kitchen window catching the soft sunlight each morning. She painted landscapes, flowers, the barn, and sometimes small sketches of animals on the farm. Each brushstroke seemed to carry a piece of her past, her hope, and her joy, and Daniel admired every one of them. One morning, Daniel built a small wooden studio near the barn for Lena. He wanted her to have a space that belonged entirely to her, a place where she could create without interruption and feel completely free. When he led her to the new space, Lena's eyes widened in surprise and she ran her hand over the wooden frame, smiling softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel shook his head and smiled. "It's yours," he said simply. "A place to paint, to dream, and to remember that this world has beauty too." Lena looked around the studio, the sunlight streaming through the open windows, and felt a sense of safety and belonging that she had never known before. It was a place where her past could stay in the shadows, and her present could shine fully. The animals seemed to respond to the calm energy of the farm as well. The horses nuzzled Lena when she approached, and the chickens followed her with quiet curiosity. Even the barn, once a place of hard work and echoing footsteps, now felt warm and inviting, as if the spaces themselves were celebrating the new harmony that had grown between Daniel and Lena. Each evening, after the chores were complete, they would sit on the porch together. The air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers, and the soft light of the sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and pink. One evening, Lena turned to Daniel with a gentle smile. "I never thought I could feel so safe somewhere," she said softly. Daniel reached for her hand and held it gently. "You've earned it," he replied. "You've survived so much and you've grown stronger every day. You deserve this peace." Lena's eyes glistened with tears, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of relief and quiet happiness. For the first time in many years, she felt fully seen and fully accepted, and the walls she had built around herself were now open to trust, love, and hope. The small studio became a place of transformation. Lena painted with focus and joy, capturing the colors of the valley, the patterns of clouds in the sky, and the soft movements of animals in the fields. She even began to paint people, not faces from her past, but imagined figures filled with warmth, laughter, and light. Each painting was a reflection of her healing, a visual record of the trust and comfort she had found on the farm. Daniel would watch quietly from the doorway, feeling a deep sense of pride and happiness for the woman who had once been so cautious and guarded. Over time, they began to share more dreams and plans for the future. Lena spoke of traveling to nearby towns, of exploring the forests beyond the farm, and even of showing her paintings in small galleries. Daniel encouraged her gently, reminding her that the world was open and that she was no longer alone to face it. Their conversations, once cautious and brief, had grown longer and filled with laughter, hope, and careful planning. Each shared moment strengthened their bond and solidified the foundation of trust that had been built over the past weeks. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Daniel noticed Lena kneeling in the sunlight, brushing soil from her hands with a quiet smile. "I never imagined I could feel this happy," she said softly. Daniel knelt beside her and brushed a few stray hairs from her face. "You've earned every moment," he replied, "and we've built it together." Lena looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and quiet wonder, understanding in that moment that healing was not something done alone. It was something nurtured through connection, patience, and care. As spring turned to early summer, the farm flourished. The garden produced vegetables, the flowers were vibrant, and the fields were alive with the sounds of birds and insects. Daniel and Lena had developed routines that were filled with joy rather than obligation. Each day held small adventures, tending the animals, exploring the edges of the property, or simply sitting together on the porch watching the sun dip below the mountains. The storms that had once brought fear were now distant memories, replaced by calm sunlight and laughter. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lena stood beside Daniel on the porch, her hand in his. "I never thought I could feel this at peace," she said softly. Daniel looked at her with a warm smile. "You deserve it," he replied, "and I'm glad I could be here with you to see it." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, holding its breath for the quiet beauty of the moment. The evenings became a time for reflection and gratitude. They would talk about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. Lena shared stories from her childhood, the small joys she remembered and the ways she hoped to bring those joys into her life now. Daniel shared memories of his own past, the quiet struggles, and the lessons he had learned from life on the farm. Through these conversations, they discovered not just companionship, but deep friendship and understanding. Each shared story, each gentle touch, and each moment of laughter or reflection brought them closer together. Over the next few weeks, Lena's confidence grew even more. She started leading small projects on the farm, planning new sections of the garden, and teaching Daniel new ideas about painting and art. Their bond was no longer tentative. It was steady, built on shared experiences, patience, and mutual respect. The farm, once a place of solitude and routine, had transformed into a home filled with life, warmth, and laughter. One day, Daniel surprised Lena with a small wooden bench placed near the edge of the garden, overlooking the fields and mountains. "A place for you to rest and watch the world," he said. Lena smiled, touched by the gesture. She sat on the bench, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze, and realized how far she had come. The fear that had once dominated her life had been replaced with hope, creativity, and trust. For the first time in many years, she felt fully alive in the present, ready to embrace the future with courage and joy. The farm itself seemed to echo this sense of peace. The animals moved freely, the flowers bloomed vibrantly, and even the barn, once a place of work and echoes, now felt warm and inviting. Each evening, Daniel and Lena would sit together on the porch, sharing quiet conversation, laughter, or simply enjoying the beauty of the world around them. The bond they had created was deep and lasting, formed through patience, understanding, and the courage to trust one another fully. By summer, the valley had become a place of quiet magic. The days were long, filled with sunlight and the gentle rhythm of life. Daniel and Lena worked, created, laughed, and shared in ways that had once seemed impossible. The shadows of the past were no longer barriers. They were part of the story that had brought them to this place of hope, healing, and trust. Lena's scars, both visible and invisible, were now marks of resilience and strength, honored and accepted by someone who saw her fully. On a warm evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Lena turned to Daniel with a soft smile. "I feel like I belong here," she said quietly. Daniel took her hand in his, holding it gently. "You do," he replied. "You always did. You just needed someone to help you see it." Lena's eyes glistened with tears, not of sorrow but of gratitude, hope and peace. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and steadiness of someone who had become more than a companion, someone who was a true partner in her life. In every sense, as night fell, the stars emerged, bright and clear against the velvet sky. Daniel and Lena sat on the porch hand in hand, watching the world around them and feeling the quiet joy of being together. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but they had faced it together, building trust, understanding, and a life that was safe, beautiful, and full of hope. The farm was no longer just a home. It was a sanctuary, a place where scars could heal, dreams could grow, and love could thrive. For the first time in many years, both Daniel and Lena felt fully alive in the present. The past, with all its struggles and pain, was acknowledged but no longer held power over them. Together they had created a life of calm, connection, and possibility. A life that was stronger and more beautiful for everything they had endured and overcome. As they sat quietly, watching the gentle sway of the trees in the moonlight, they both knew that this was only the beginning of a life filled with